Oh, hello my friends. Welcome back to the channel. Hope you are enjoying the videos. If so, please like, share and subscribe. It has been a very busy and hectic week for me. So the video is a bit short. Hope you guys can understand and give this story and others on the channel as much love as you guys give to the strongest warlock. This is the story of Claire's life. Claire's life led her to love. Love led her to death. With death began her eternal struggle to retain both her love and her humanity through 5 centuries of endless nights. This is book 1 of 6 book series, with each book covering a different century. Book 1 covers 1583 to 1690. In this part, we will cover 1583 and 1584. 1583. Claire Wallace grumbled as she struggled with another waist-length black strand of hair that kept finding its way out of the bonnet her mother had insisted on her wearing to keep her looking presentable in public. She just shook her head as she then moved to lean against a nearby fence, staring blankly at the other townspeople, perusing the marketplace her mother had dragged her to that afternoon. She would never understand her mother's ways. The woman was determined to marry Claire off as soon as possible, despite her only being 15, while insisting that any time Claire was anywhere near the boys in town, she hide herself in bonnets and unbecoming dresses. Though, as she looked around the crowd, she realized it was obvious that she was not the only young girl whose mother had made them dress as though they were in a convent. Dressing like a nun to get a husband. Yes, that really made sense, Claire thought with a sigh and another shake of her head. As her eyes took note of her mother still speaking with a woman she knew from church, still several feet away from her, Claire sighed once more and turned her eyes back in the other direction. It was then that she noted one young girl who looked to be about her age. But more importantly, the other girl's dress was ornately designed, and her hair was free, while she even wore a smile while looking over herbs, spices, and vegetables that were being sold at a nearby stand. Claire narrowed her eyes slightly, having some idea of who the girl was. She lived only a few miles from Claire's family. She was supposedly in the employ of the extremely wealthy recluse, Mr. Torrance, who Claire honestly could never remember even having laid eyes upon once. She just knew, as everyone in town did, that he was very wealthy, and that young girl who had drawn her attention, as well as the young girl's mother, were in his employ and had been for quite some time. Of course, there were other rumors about the mysterious Mr. Torrance, as well as the 2 women working for him, and those rumors are what really piqued Claire's curiosity enough to move her towards the girl. "You actually know what most of this stuff is used for?" Claire greeted the other young girl as she reached her side, referring to the herbs the petite redhead had been thoroughly inspecting. The other girl, who looked to be only about 16 herself, turned slightly towards Claire, smiling at the greeting, though she also seemed surprised by it in some odd way. "Well, most folks would use it for cooking," she replied. She gave the answer in an oddly furtive manner, while the man behind the stand barely hid the disdain on his face that he seemed to hold towards the young redhead. "I know, I'm terrible. My mother says I'm hopeless in the kitchen, which apparently is a grave flaw," Claire teased, trying to hide her uneasiness that the vendor seemed to somehow disapprove of the other girl. Though, having heard bits of the rumors about the girl herself, Claire wasn't completely surprised by it, just curious, really. "I'll take all of these," the redhead returned with brevity to the man as she tossed more than enough money onto his table and gathered her chosen items. Her features softened as she turned back to Claire. "Want to help me carry?" she asked. Sure," Claire agreed with a slight biting of her lip as the other girl handed her a basket and filled it with half of her purchases. Claire knew that her mother was one of the many who seemed to have suspicions about Mr. Torrance and his servants. But at the moment, her mother still seemed busy chatting, so Claire continued her attempt at making a new friend nonetheless. "So, I'm Chanterelle, in case you didn't know already," the other girl stated as she began leading Claire off towards her waiting horse. "Claire," she returned her own introduction as she followed her. "So you're being nice to me. That's different," Chanterelle continued. "Pardon," Claire replied with an uneasy smile. "I'm sure you've heard that most of the town don't particularly like having me around." "I don't really talk to that many people, honestly," Claire offered quietly. Yet, you don't seem surprised by the statement, Chantel returned with a slight smirk. I've just heard speculations, I guess, since no one ever really sees your employer and he's so wealthy, Claire admitted softly. I don't really put a lot of faith in rumors, though, without any proof anyway, Claire added even more quietly. So, you do know who I am then, Chantel replied wryly. Not really, Claire smiled uneasily again as they neared the horse. I just know you work for Mr. Torrance, really, she repeated. And that there are rumors, Chantel smiled again as they reached the horse. There she began tying her baskets in place. I can only imagine what they are this year, she stated, more to herself, as she shook her head and continued her task. This year, Claire repeated, and then continued. You look pretty young to have been working for him for too long. Chantel just smiled again before answering. I don't know if I'd really say I work for him, though I was born in the house. My father was a servant of his too, I think, she added more quietly. Oh, did he pass away while you were still young? Claire asked with concern. Maybe, Chantel shrugged with a lack of concern as she finished readying the horse. Maybe, Claire repeated, obviously confused by the answer. So where's your father? Chantel returned, switching gears. Home, tending our farm, Claire answered slowly, seeming a little thrown by Chantel's sudden question. Let me guess, he and your mother married, 16 years ago? Or do you have older siblings? Chantel asked her in an oddly cynical manner. No, it's just me, Claire returned. I had a difficult birth. Mother couldn't have any more children, Claire responded, easily sharing the information despite the oddness of such questions coming from a virtual stranger. She claims I've gotten even more difficult since then, Claire added with a wry humor managing to peek through. This narrative has been unlawfully taken from Royal Road. If you see it on Amazon, please report it. Better not be too difficult. They'll start talking about you the way they do about me and my mother, Chantel smiled insincerely. They're already giving you those pathetically disapproving looks just because you're standing here talking to me. I'm bad news, don't you know? Chantel returned with the same cynicism that made her seem to have a maturity beyond her years. I think I'll decide that for myself, Claire returned bravely. Chantel's smile then turned immediately sincere. I like you already, Claire. She chuckled before hoisting herself up onto the horse, despite the long dress. She even refused to ride side saddle as was expected of all young women. See you around. She winked down at Claire before leaning down to untie the horse and starting away from the market and the sea of disapproving faces. Claire smiled after the slightly older girl as she rode off, though her smile was interrupted by her arm being roughly grasped by her mother, who looked less than happy right then. What do you think you're doing? Her mother asked her in a loud whisper through clenched teeth. Waiting for you to get done shopping, Claire asked with a confused shrug. Is that supposed to be funny? She returned in the same disapproving tone, looking around nervously, trying to gauge how many townspeople were still looking their way. No, Claire responded as more of a question. Let's get to the carriage now, her mother growled as she began dragging her after her. Honestly, Claire, why do you do this to me? What did I do? Claire asked with creased brow as her mother dragged her from the crowded marketplace. You know exactly what you did, her mother grumbled angrily. What? I was trying to make one friend in this horrible town, Claire returned, causing her mother to stop and sent her one more angry look on her as they reached the carriage. And you pick that? Her mother shook her head, forcing back whatever words at first came to her mind. Girl, out of every other one in town. Another shake of her head as she roughly nudged Claire toward the carriage. I know you're more intelligent than that. I thought the whole point in dragging me to town with you is so I could pretend I didn't have a brain in my head, so some nice man will want to marry me. 'Cause, Lord knows, a woman with a brain can't possibly make a good wife. Claire scoffed with her own bit of anger showing through, as it so easily did when her buttons were pressed. Her mother's jaw simply dropped in response to that comment. Camilla Wallace's face reddened at the statement, only thankful that no one else was now near enough to have heard it as well. If we weren't out here with all these people already looking at you, Like they are, I would. Her mother didn't even finish the sentence as she shook her head and angrily got up into the carriage. She immediately reined the horses into action while Claire refused to look at her mother, simply crossing her arms over her chest with a huff as they pulled away. The next morning, Claire received the punishment of barn cleaning while her parents went to town once more. Though she hardly thought of it as that daunting of a punishment, considering how much she hated the play acting that was expected of her any time she went to town herself. Besides that fact, at least the horses didn't give her all the disapproving looks her mother did, while her father mostly didn't even seem to notice her existence at all. After all, she was an only child, and a female, which hardly would have made her very important to any father in that day and age, or so it seemed to her more often than not. She sighed as she wiped some sweat away from her brow on that humid Massachusetts summer morning. She was then easily distracted from her tidying of the stalls as she heard hoof-beats approaching from further up the dirt road. The sound came from the opposite direction of the town, which was a few miles off from the Wallace homestead. Claire peered around the open doorway of the barn to see who might be approaching. It was not really that she had the urge to be social, as much as she was just bored with her current task and wanted some form of distraction. A moment later, the jet-black horse came into view, being ridden by none other than the infamous redhead, Chanterelle. Claire somehow found it surprising to see the girl, even though she had always known that Mr. Torrance's home was not far off. It just somehow seemed strange that the girl would just then be passing by, though it was likely that she passed by Claire's home often, since it was between the Torrance home and town. Perhaps it was just that Claire never bothered paying much attention to who might have been passing by their home before. In 15 years, she had never managed to find anyone in that town who she had any interest in acknowledging anyway. That was, before her ever so brief chat with Chanterelle the day before. "Hey there," Claire called to the other teen. She couldn't help a smile that was made even more sincere by the simple fact of knowing that talking to this girl at all would go against her mother's wishes, and she bristled at nearly every one of those. Chanterelle returned the smile, though warily, as she stopped the horse at the bottom of the lane that led to the Wallace home. The house and barn themselves were set off a few hundred feet from the dirt road, and backed by what seemed like endless acres of woodland on all sides. In front of the house was a large fenced-in section which grew a variety of vegetables. And not far off was the barn, which housed several chickens and pigs as well as a few horses. "Well, hello again," Chanterelle responded as she guided the horse to take a few slow steps up the lane. "Is your mother going to come running out and try to chase me off with a stick if I tell Storm here to come on up the lane?" Chanterelle teased. Claire just shook her head, though couldn't help her smirk at Chanterelle's question. "They're gone for the day," she offered as she carelessly dropped the manure-stained shovel against a nearby hay bale, deeming her cleaning to be done for the day, despite the still somewhat dirty stalls behind her. When Chanterelle's mount finished the approach, Chanterelle slid down from the large stallion to tie him to the fence post outside the barn that Claire now stood near. Claire wasn't able to stop her eyes from moving over yet another beautiful dress that Chanterelle wore. It was quite colorful, and looked way too expensive to have been worn by most anyone who was just out riding for the day. Claire nervously bit her lip as she self-consciously glanced down at her own very plain, brown, and not exactly tidy dress that she wore that day. "So you get along with your mother better than I get along with mine, I assume." Claire smiled nervously as she moved her gaze back to Chanterelle's pretty face. Chanterelle just chuckled at the question. "We get along well enough. We seem to have a lot more in common than most mothers and daughters anyway," she offered. "After all, it's both of us who the town talks about. They were talking about Mom way before me, you know. Especially when I came along." Chanterelle grinned, more amused than offended by the opinions whispered by the rest of the townspeople. "Yeah, your mom and dad weren't married when you were born, right?" Claire returned. "Wow, if that's the worst thing they're saying these days, things have definitely improved," Chanterelle returned with a still amused smirk. "So it doesn't bother you that people do talk?" Claire dared. "Well, you're talking, but to me instead of about me, so apparently it can't be all that bad." "Well, I don't exactly fit in either, so I tend to not immediately agree with what the majority thinks. Since it's usually the opposite of anything I'd ever think, Claire admitted, trying not to sound proud of that fact, though she was, despite the grief her own opinions on the world in general had caused her for most of her short, sheltered, stifled life. Maybe you were born in the wrong century, Chanterelle responded wryly, though the statement was obviously one that had no way of being proven to be a truth, as no one could see the future, and the past couldn't have been much better for someone with Claire's outlooks on life. Still, Chanterelle's tone seemed to somehow imply that she knew it, unequivocally. Claire let out an uneasy laugh at the statement, but tried to find a response. She already sensed that Chanterelle had a wisdom that far outweighed hers, and Claire had no desire to make herself seem less intelligent ever, whether it be in pursuit of a husband or even a new friend. Well, even if that is true, I somehow doubt there's much I could do about it. I was born in 1568, and it's doubtful I'll be around much past the 1630s, if that. So I guess I have to put up with this particular century after all, Claire replied, attempting to sound jovial, even whilst referring to her own death. You never know, Chanterelle said wryly as she looked around furtively. She then moved on from the cryptic statement to another that may have sounded a bit suspicious, depending on who was hearing it. So it's just us here then. Yeah, they both went to town today. I wasn't allowed to tag along this time. Oh, darn, Claire added the latter sarcastically. Yeah, you never know what bad element you might attract, Chanterelle replied, with a lack of concern for her own reputation once more. You almost sound amused by the things people say about you, honestly. Claire couldn't stop herself from commenting on the other girl's carefree attitude once more. You could say that, Chanterelle responded nonchalantly as she looked around once more. And I could use a good laugh on another boring day. So tell me, what are the rumors this month? She chuckled as she plopped down onto the grass in front of the barn and reached up to pull Claire down to a seat next to her. Aren't you afraid of getting that dress dirty? Claire asked, though she didn't stop the other girl from pulling her down to that seat next to her, as Claire's own modest attire was already soiled by her morning's chores. I've got dozens of 'em, Chanterelle scoffed as she leaned back on the palms of her hands and smiled up at the blue skis above. You do? Claire asked with obvious surprise as she nervously pushed her long ponytail back over her shoulder. Her raven-colored locks had been pulled back due only to her aforementioned chores, as she much preferred to leave her hair free, though she could only get away with that when she was there at her parents' home. But aren't you a servant? Claire asked before she was able to check what may have been taken offensively, though she honestly had not meant it that way. Well, sort of, Chanterelle smiled, still gazing at the sky above them. She still showed no signs of having taken offense to Claire's statement, which did relieve Claire a bit, though did nothing to lessen her own confusion. Sort of, Claire had to ask for clarification once more. Well, Mr. Torrance, he doesn't really treat me, or Mom, much like servants, so most of the time it really doesn't feel like we are. He bought you all those dresses, Claire asked with surprise. Some, but I mostly like to make my own, the way I want them to look, rather than what you could normally get from some other seamstress, Chanterelle answered. She then added, It gives me something to do during the day anyway. During the day? What do you do during the night? Claire chuckled, somehow amused by the statement. Depends on the night, Chanterelle responded with a bit of mischief to her tone. Right, Claire then looked back at Chanterelle curiously. That's an interesting answer, I'd have to say. The night has always been more interesting, Chanterelle added, seeming amused by her own cryptic statements. Claire let out another awkward laugh before forcing herself onward through a more than confusing conversation. You're what, 16? Aren't you expected to be tucked safely into your home every night as soon as it gets dark? At least until you find some man to marry you, and then have to be tucked into his home every night instead. Claire tried hiding her confusion with a thick wall of sarcasm in regards to the life that she found herself leading, and assumed most other females of her age were forced to lead as well. Though obviously, Chanterelle definitely didn't seem like most females her age. If that was my life, then I doubt the townspeople would have any rumors at all to spread, now would they? She asked smartly. Speaking of, weren't you going to tell me what those rumors were these days? Like I said, I could use a laugh. I've heard some pretty crazy things, Claire told the other girl, sounding apologetic on behalf of the rest of the town, when she herself had never been among the majority who did spread those crazy tales. This tale has been unlawfully lifted without the author's consent. Report any appearances on Amazon. Like, Chanterelle prodded with a grin. Stuff that good girls shouldn't know about, let alone talk about, Claire added in a quiet tone, though still with a touch of sarcasm to it. Oh, well, if you're another one of those good girls, I'm just gonna have to leave right now, Chanterelle joked as she moved as though to stand up. Hey, wait, Claire exclaimed as she reached for the girl's wrist to stop her departure. Well, if you're a good girl, then you shouldn't be talking to me at all, Chanterelle teased her once more. Fine, I guess I'm not a good girl, considering I like talking to someone with a mind of their own. Chanterelle allowed a smile of victory before responding. All right then, I accept your apology and your invitation, she chuckled as she sat once more. So, what did depends on the night mean? Claire moved forward through the conversation now that she had stopped it from ending prematurely after all. Wasn't I the one asking you questions? Chanterelle returned with a smile. Sounds like you already know about most of the rumors. You don't need me repeating them. You're the one who's such a mystery to everyone after all. Not me. I'm just a black sheep. You're an enigma, if you will, Claire replied with her own small grin. Chanterelle chuckled again. Well, if you've heard the rumors, then you must know all about me. What's the mystery? She retorted while holding her smile. Please, like they're all true. I don't believe that for a second, Claire returned. So which ones aren't true? Chanterelle returned. How would I know? Claire laughed. So, you think some of them are true then? Chanterelle returned with yet another sly smile. I don't know. Okay, I'll make it easy. Tell me when you think might be true and I'll tell you if you're right. I'm not gonna do that. Most are just. Claire refused, only allowing her volume to drop a bit. Come on, hun, it's obvious I'm pretty hard to offend. So throw it at me. What have you heard? It's the only way I'll tell you what's true and what's not. You'll be the only one in town who's solved the enigma, she chuckled again. Yep, you are evil, Claire returned with a shake of her head, as well as a smile. But she continued nonetheless. Okay, considering what you said about Mr. Torrance, there's one that I could see having some semblance of possibility to it. And that would be, Chanterelle pressed, hiding any reaction behind that continued smile of hers. Okay, one thing I've heard is that Mr. Torrance is single, and the only servants he has are you and your mother, 2 unmarried females. So, what? Chanterelle continued to play innocent. So, another awkward laugh. Come on, you yourself said that he doesn't treat you like servants, so. Claire repeated, attempting to wheedle Chanterelle into finishing the sentence for her. So, you're asking if either me or my mother have an improper relationship with Mr. Torrance. Chanterelle supplied a version of the question after all, though still sounding amused by it. Well, it's what some people say, and then what you said, and with the dresses and all. Well, it lends itself to being remotely possible, I guess, Claire said with another uneasy shrug. Well, I suppose that depends on your definition of improper. Chanterelle gave another non-answer. My definition or everyone else's? Claire asked with a slight scowl. Well, do you think that sharing a bed with someone you love is improper? Chanterelle asked, sounding at least a bit more serious than she had for the rest of the conversation. Well, no, Claire returned softly as she watched the other girl's expressions. Then no, we don't have an improper relationship with him, Chanterelle stated simply. You do, though, share a bed? Claire asked with slightly widened emerald eyes. You look awful surprised for someone who just claimed that it wasn't improper, Chanterelle teased, though still seemed unoffended. Well, which one of you is shares his bed? Claire changed her statement mid-sentence. Chanterelle just smirked again as she moved to stand once more. She reached out to pet the black stallion as she spoke again. Like I said, Mom and I have more in common than most mothers and daughters, was her simple reply as she continued to stroke the large beast. You mean you both sleep with him? Claire exclaimed, her brain failing to check her words once more, as it often did. Shocked, are you? Chanterelle told her skeptically as she looked back at Claire, who was still frozen to her seat on the ground. Ready to do your mother proud and run off to church to pray for my poor damned and wicked soul. Chanterelle spoke sarcastically, though there was an undercurrent there, as if gauging whether or not that truly would be Claire's reaction. Claire stumbled around the words, forcing herself up from the ground before finding the rest of the sentence. Didn't you say that your father was a servant of Mr. Torrance's too? Isn't Mr. Torrance like old? She then tried to lighten the question. I mean too old to really want to tend to two different lovers, she added, trying to gauge whether Chanterelle was serious about the facts of she and her mother's relationship with their employer. Or if it was just a ploy of her sharpened wit to shock Claire. Apparently not. Chanterelle simply returned with another small grin as she ran her hand over her horse's sleek coat once more. But you and your mother, you're content to share the same man? Claire had to ask, having difficulty even stating out loud the idea of such a strange setup. He treats us very well. It's not really a problem. It is only the three of us at the moment, after all. Not like me and my mother have a long list of other suitors or anything, she added in an only slightly quieter tone. Well, it's not because you're unattractive. I'm sure that if your living arrangement was different, you'd have plenty of boys lined up to cart you off with them. Chanterelle just smirked again. I don't want other boys. I've got the only man I could put up with myself anyway. He's all I need, she added quietly, allowing a small peek inside what seemed like such a strong exterior. So you do love him? Claire asked more quietly, wistfully even, as if love was something she could never imagine herself to ever have. At least not in that place and time, which she had had the unfortunate luck of being born into. Without hesitation, more than my own life, was Chanterelle's answer. As summer began to wind down, Claire continued her secret friendship with Chanterelle. It was secretive in that usually they only saw each other when Chanterelle rode past and noted that Claire's parents' carriage was gone. Despite having been friends for that entire summer, the details of Chanterelle's odd life were still quite the mystery. After the confession about the alleged affair she and her mother, Anna, shared with their employer, Claire just hadn't gotten up the nerve to ask her about all those other rumors. After all, if one was true, who knew how many others were? It was almost as though Claire was scared to find truth in all those other rumors, as she did truly like the other girl. So what craziness did you have in mind today? Claire smiled to Chanterelle after having tipped her off about another one of her parents' days away. Which led to Chanterelle riding up the lane mere moments after Claire's parents were out of sight. Dunno, wanna help me get ready for tonight? What's tonight? Claire responded as she easily let Chanterelle begin leading her away from where she had secured Storm in one of the Wallace's unused stalls. It's a holiday, silly, Chanterelle told her as she continued nonchalantly leading her away from the barn. It is, Claire asked, not honestly able to quickly think of any holiday that took place the third week of September. Well, it used to be anyway, Chanterelle stated with the tiniest trace of bitterness. Some of us still celebrate it, though. Who us? Me and my mother. Your mom. You gonna repeat everything I say all day, girl? Chanterelle teased her again. Claire let out a wary smile before answering. Well, you never seemed to have any interest in even introducing me to her, so it surprised me that you mentioned her again at all. My mom has to stay at the house during the day, and it's not like you could get away with coming to visit us at night. Your parents would tie you to the bed before ever letting you wander off to visit us, or even anyone else, after dark, Chanterelle teased further as she didn't even slow her pace as they neared the approaching tree line. What do you mean your mom has to stay at the house during the day? Claire asked with another crease of her brow as Chanterelle began leading her into the woods that rested between her parents' home and Mr. Torrance's. Mr. Torrance just likes having one of us there during the day. I never said he wasn't eccentric, she added with another little grin. To put it mildly, Claire replied under her breath. Where on earth are we going? She had to ask as she ducked to avoid a low-hanging branch, while simultaneously trying to keep her long dress from getting caught on the rest of the plant life that covered the forest floor. though Chanterelle seemed to have no trouble traversing the forest in her own long dress, as though she were quite familiar with those woods. "I told you to get ready for tonight. And I'm supposed to know what that means, and why we're going through the woods to do it?" Claire asked as she wrinkled her nose as she ducked a cobweb that hung from yet another low branch. "Well, if you'd rather go talk to the horses all day, just waiting for your parents to get home again, I'm sure that would be just as interesting," Chanterelle chided her. Claire scowled at the statement before giving in. "Fine, lead on," she told her with a shake of her head as she followed her onward to wherever this strange girl was leading. Nearly 20 minutes later, the two girls arrived at Chanterelle's destination, which was a beautiful clearing in the woods. There was a stream running past the clearing, which was surrounded by a thick tree line on all sides that wouldn't allow much visibility if there was anybody else passing through the nearby woods. But what really drew Claire's attention about the beautiful clearing was the circle of stones surrounding a reasonably well-used fire pit. On the stones were carved several symbols that made no sense to Claire, but they worried her, considering some of those rumors she had indeed heard about the only person she had ever really considered a friend. Claire nervously bit her lip once more as her eyes moved over the different symbols, though she said nothing as she continued standing at the edge of the clearing, while Chanterelle approached the pit and began emptying the contents of the bag she had strapped over her shoulder when she had arrived that morning. Chanterelle went about laying out several runes, charms, trinkets, candles, a pair of chalices, and even two small knives, all in strategic positions around the pit. Claire felt her throat tighten when she saw the two small knives, though nothing in Chanterelle's movements seemed to be anything other than graceful and peaceful. Just the mere sight of the blades was enough to make Claire begin wondering how much of the nastier rumors about the girl and her mother were true. Just like the one about them, each being the mistress of a man who nobody in town even had a recollection of ever meeting. "This tale has been unlawfully obtained from Royal Road. If you discover it on Amazon, kindly report it." "You've gotten quiet," Chanterelle spoke up as she continued her arrangement of the various items that were to apparently be used in the night's celebration of whatever holiday she may have believed it to be. Claire tried desperately to find a response to the girl's query. "Just wondered if we were going hunting or something," was the only one she could come up with on the spot. "Hunting?" Chanterelle tossed a brief smile back toward the other girl. "What on earth would give you that idea?" she asked with a puzzled smile. "Well, those are knives, aren't they?" Claire dared as she looked around the abandoned woods that surrounded them, not even sure she could find her own way back to her home without Chanterelle leading the way. "Actually, they're athames," Chanterelle replied without pause. What?" Claire asked. "They're not for hunting." Chanterelle gave her a simpler explanation, which did nothing to lessen her confusion. "Then what are they for?" Claire quickly looked back the way they came once more. "Focusing," Chanterelle answered, finally allowing herself to turn back toward Claire, whose tension was more than obvious at that point. "Focusing what?" Claire asked as her voice grew smaller, not taking her eyes off the other girl now. "Thoughts, feelings, wants, desires, emotions. Power," Chanterelle told her in the same firm but gentle tone. "Power?" Claire asked, her voice nearly a whisper at that point. "Basically, yes," Chanterelle returned matter-of-factly, though still kept her eyes fixed on Claire as well. Chan, you're kinda sounding a little scary." "What's so scary? Focusing one's thoughts," Chanterelle returned in the same self-assured tone. "You kinda sound like you're talking about something like, Claire looked around once more, then lowered her voice another decibel. "Like witchcraft or something," she whispered worriedly. Chanterelle then let out an unexpected laugh as she glanced back at her arrangements before speaking to Claire once more. "You mean you hadn't heard that one? That's the big one, after all." "What?" Claire asked, her own thoughts more than muddled then. "The one about me and Mom being witches," she chided in the same oddly unconcerned tone. "It's not funny, Chan," Claire told her worriedly. "They've killed people for that," she added in the same whispered tone. "No, actually they killed people for not giving up their own beliefs and becoming Christians, When they decided to make that religion up, that is, Chanterelle said with a bit of ice in her tone, though it didn't seem truly directed at Claire. Kiss the cross or they will burn you, she added the last sentence with a scoff. Claire swallowed again. Claire had not exactly been that fond of religion, but she did find herself being scared of what others might do to her only friend if they had any proof of her own opinions. So, you're saying you actually are? A witch, I mean, she added in another whisper. Do you know what witch really means? Nothing good, Claire added sadly, now very worried for her friend's opinions truly getting her into serious, if not deadly, trouble. It actually is a form of the word wise, Chanterelle stated firmly. It's true. It was the name for those who understood the true nature of the world around them, natural and mystical, the wise women or witches. That can't be what it means, Claire denied, though hardly argumentatively. Oh, it does, Chanterelle assured. I thought it meant women who cast spells and worshipped the devil, and made sacrifices and things, Claire dared. You mean spells like protection spells to ward off bad fortune, spells to make crops grow and animals flourish, and mixing herbs together to heal and help others and ease their pain. Yeah, that sounds really evil, doesn't it? She scoffed. What about the devil? Claire asked, her curiosity just barely outweighing her fear. Wouldn't know. I don't believe in him, and I don't know a single actual witch who does. After all, he was only created to give all the Christians something to fear if they broke a single one of the church's precious and ridiculous rules, she stated in the same firm tone. Though she honestly seemed to want to answer the questions that would set Claire straight about the lies that had been spreading for nearly 200 years about all of those who still held fast to the beliefs that existed for centuries before Christianity ever did. And sacrifices, Claire swallowed again. We make offerings, not sacrifices. Chanterelle shook her head at that one, but still didn't falter to answer the question. What kind of offerings? Claire asked with narrowed eyes, trying not to give into the visions the ingrained beliefs of all the others around her inspired. Trinkets, charms, gifts, whatever the spirits wish to have. They all have their own personalities just like us, she answered with a soft smile. And if it's a spirit that wants something that would cause harm to a living being, chances are it's a spirit you really wouldn't want to be dealing with anyway. Not like they'd be very trustworthy, she added, almost as though this was just an everyday conversation, which for her it most likely was. So, you're saying all of those bad things are untrue? Claire repeated, still looking uneasy, though still not leaving the conversation. Like everything that a human has the power to do, it can be used for good or evil. But if you use it for evil, the spirits and fates are much fairer than life. You will pay for it and pay dearly. So using any of our power for evil, it's something that would only be done by someone with a very short life. Evil will never pay, and real witches know that. Hence the one commandment we have, which sums up all 10 of yours and much more thoroughly at that, she added with another wry smile. What commandment is that? Claire asked softly. Harm none, Chanterelle stated simply. Harm none, Claire repeated thoughtfully. It means live your life however you want, as long as you don't ever hurt someone else to do so. Like I said, it's much more thorough, she added with another sincere smile. The next day, nearly an hour before the sun was to set on that still warm September day, was when Chanterelle awoke with a yawn and a stretch from her nap that afternoon in the large, lush bed next to her employer, Mr. Torrance, who was still in the grip of a sleep as deep as death itself. About time you woke up, her mother, Anna, chided her, from her place nearby the bed where she continued the painting she had been working on for days. Anna had reddish-brown locks that fell loosely a few inches below her shoulders, where her slender body was covered by nothing more than one of her employer's expensive shirts, which obviously were a bit too large for her frame. But most striking about Anna's appearance was that she, herself, didn't look a day older than her early 20s, which made the fact of her having a daughter in her mid-teens that much harder to believe, as were many things about she and her daughter. Well, we were up a bit late, Chanterelle responded with her own smile, cuddling closer to her bedmate, who lay upon his stomach, Chanterelle's fingers curling in his long blonde locks as his head lay turned to the side, his beautiful face and closed eyes towards where Anna stood, painting, while he remained fast asleep. I know, I was there. Anna reminded her equally beautiful daughter with a playful grin as she applied another brushstroke to the canvas. I'll keep watch the last hour if you're tired, Mom. Chanterelle offered as she placed a brief kiss upon his bare, pale back and glanced towards her mother once more. Anna smiled at the offer, thinking on it a moment before answering, No, it's only an hour. I wouldn't want to do that without asking him first anyway. She added more quietly. I'm a big girl now. I think I could handle it. No one in town comes near this place anyway. She teased her mother with facts the older woman already knew. Before Anna could respond, it was almost as though the fates wanted to scold Chanterelle for her occasional overconfidence, as there was then the sound of rapping upon the door at the front of the large home. What were you saying? Anna asked, startled by the fact of a visitor herself, as both women turned their eyes towards the front of the home, despite being tucked into the large master bedroom at the back of the large house. Maybe it's Claire, Chanterelle asked with her own uneasy shrug, as both she and her mother moved to slide into nearby dresses that they had already set out for the night, as Chanterelle had only been clothed in her undergarments as she slept. An hour before dusk, Anna denied as she hurried to dress. I'll get the door, you stay with him, Chanterelle offered, having dressed more quickly. Please be careful, Anna called after her daughter, seeming truly concerned, though even that maternal concern somehow didn't outweigh her need to stay at the bedside of her sleeping lover. Chanterelle took a deep breath as she left the bedroom, locking it behind her, and squared her shoulders before moving forward through the house, to the front door. One more deep breath, and another look back over her shoulder towards the bedroom before finally moving to open the door. Much to her immediate relief, it was a stranger to her that stood at the door. Though most would be wary of strangers, Chanterelle's life had somehow convinced her that a stranger would be less dangerous than any townsperson who had suddenly decided to pay them a visit out of nowhere. She was not stupid, though. She did keep the door closed most of the way, only opening it a crack to take in the sight of the young man who waited there. After all, it was still almost an hour before the man of the house, and the home's true protector would awaken. Yes, she asked the man hoarsely, her eyes somehow not able to keep from appreciatively glancing over the young man's appearance. He didn't look much older than Chanterelle, herself, possibly in his late teens, with long strawberry blonde locks pulled back into a loose ponytail, and looking a bit winded as if he had traveled a long way by foot on that very day. The large, but worn bag he held over shoulders that looked surprisingly strong despite the narrow waist, which suggested he was a bit underfed, also lent credence to the theory of him having traveled a long way to somehow reach their door. Hi, he swallowed as he looked Chanterelle over as well, surprised by the fact of her long red locks being free around her shoulders, but he did not dwell on this fact, as he seemed to have more important things on his mind. Sorry about it being almost dark, but I had to walk, all the way from the next town over, he added as an afterthought. And the town, and the other houses between here and there, they didn't strike you as a good place to stop, but this one did, Chanterelle returned. Her finding him to be physically attractive didn't totally quell the suspicion brought on by her own concern for her employer's well-being during those hours while he slumbered. Actually, this was the place I was looking for, he answered her, still seeming somewhat unsure of his words, though determined as well. Unauthorized use of content. If you find this story on Amazon, report the violation. A visible tension then came over her as Chanterelle stood up straighter and held the only half-open door even tighter. And why's that? She asked as she swallowed hard. I was actually looking for someone, and I was told this was the last place he had lived. I was hoping he might still be here, or at least whoever was might know where to find him. The young man responded, his own breath shallow, seeming nervous to speak the words, despite how many times he had rehearsed them during his long walk to their home. Well, I've lived here all my life, and unless it's Mr. Torrance you're looking for, you're out of luck. He's the only male who's here now. Chanterelle told him with brevity she hoped would make him leave their doorstep, at least until her employer awoke. Yes, Mr. Torrance, he told her with a bit of hopefulness. I was told that the man I was looking for, that he used to work for a Torrance. I didn't get that one's first name, though. Chanterelle took another breath, obviously deflated that she had not yet deterred him, as having visitors there during the day was especially nerve-wracking to both she and Anna. The Torrances have had a lot of people work for them, for a lot of years. Whoever it is, they're long gone by now, she attempted. Well, his name was Ezekiel Beringer, I believe. Can you at least check to see if anyone remembers him? He continued hopefully. I'll ask, but you'll have to leave now. We weren't exactly expecting visitors, Chanterelle told him, losing whatever tact she may have had as she knew that her employer would not approve of any visitors at this hour. I've come a long way, though, he returned, the hope seeping out of his voice at her refusal to give him any immediate help with his search. Not my problem, Chanterelle told him, the tiniest bit of regret peeking out from behind her otherwise rough tone. Something about this young man made her want to help him, something beyond his basic attractiveness, but she knew that her other duties were more important than aiding a seemingly lost stranger appearing unannounced at their door before sunset. Before allowing herself to look back into those beautiful pale blue eyes of his once more, eyes that seemed so pleading, so desperate for answers, Chanterelle quickly ducked back inside the house, closing and locking the door tightly behind her as she leaned back against it from inside, waiting for her own nervous heartbeat to slow once more. Is he gone? Anna asked worriedly, peeking out from the bedroom door as she heard the front door close. I think he's still out there. He's asking questions about one of the former servants. Does this mean that we are going to have to move after all, like he keeps telling us? Chanterelle asked sadly. I don't know. Anna returned, looking back toward the bed behind her where he still slept, while she remained in the bedroom doorway. I guess we'll have to ask him. I finally made a friend, though, Mom, Chanterelle told her mother sadly, for the first time, sounding as though she were nothing more than a lonely teenage girl, just like Claire so obviously was. You know it's hard for us to have friends, Chan. We both told you that long ago. But Claire is different. She knows about us and still is my friend. She's different, she repeated. Knows what about us? Anna stated worriedly. No, she doesn't know what he is. I'd never tell that secret, Chanterelle assured, obviously knowing what secret her mother was most worried of having found out about the three of them that made up their strange family. Luckily, that most highly protected secret was also the most difficult for anyone to truly believe. After all, even the ever-so-level-headed church officials who tortured and killed their kind found it easier to believe in women cavorting with spirits that must only exist in their own, twisted minds than it ever was for anyone at all to truly believe in something like the Walking Dead. An eerie silence hung around the two women who continued to sit near the bed waiting for their employer to awaken. Anna tried to focus on a book as Chanterelle sat at the opposite end of the couch, fussing with her newest dress that she had been making, while not really accomplishing anything. Both women looked from his sleeping form back toward the front door, in turns, as if waiting for the lost young man to burst through the door and push them into some kind of deadly action to protect the man they both, truly, loved. Though that instance did not come to pass before their shared lover finally stirred, as the sun disappeared, making way for the moon to become the only source of light in the cooling nighttime sky. Haven, you're awake. Anna smiled to him with obvious relief flooding her as she set aside the book while Haven stretched and glanced toward her with appreciative, though slightly confused, blue eyes of his own. It is sunset. That's the routine after all. He chided her softly as he also cast another smile towards his other lover, who honestly looked closer to his age than even her youthful mother looked, as Haven himself did not look a day over 18 or 19, the same age that their earlier visitor appeared to be. When, in actuality, Haven had actually walked the earth for nearly 140 long years. We had a visitor. Chanterelle's youthful impatience and growing nervousness forced her to pipe up, despite how very distracted she usually was by Haven's nude body rising from their shared bed as he reached for his own clothing. He glanced back at the two women over his shoulder as he slowly slid the pants over his beautiful body. When was this? He asked, not immediately showing the nervousness of the two women, as all three of them had remained clearly unharmed through the course of the day he had been forced to sleep through. "Less than an hour ago," Anna responded quickly. "We think he might even still be out there," she added worriedly. "Well, who is he?" Haven asked, still seeming more curious rather than worried, as he slid into a nearby shirt as well. "I don't know. He's a little older than me only, but he was asking about one of the former servants, I think." Chanterelle relayed the details of the ever-so-brief conversation the two had shared. "He's only a little older than you." Haven thought on the statement a moment as he pulled his long locks from the back of the shirt, before adding, "Did he say what servant he was looking for?" he asked warily. "Yeah, Ezekiel Beringer, I think." Chanterelle easily answered, as she immediately noticed the knowing look that passed between Haven and Anna, a look that also seemed to be marred by a deep, deep sadness to it as well. "You guys know who he was, and who this boy is." Chanterelle interrupted the look between the other two, which still seemed somehow quite sorrowful. "It's Sean," was the quiet statement offered by both her mother and their shared lover in the same moment. "Sean? Who's Sean?" Chanterelle asked them to explain the knowledge the two obviously shared, while she had thought of the stranger as nothing more than that, a stranger. "Anna, go and see if he's still out there." Haven told the older of his lovely mistresses, still speaking in the same somber tone, while Chanterelle's eyes continued to search both of their faces for the answers they hadn't yet shared. "And if he is?" Anna asked hoarsely, seeming to be forcing back the urge for tears, which only puzzled her daughter further. "Tell him the truth, that Ezekiel died years ago." Haven himself swallowed a bit as he slowly buttoned his shirt as he added, "He doesn't need to get involved in this life, too." He added in his own soft, sad tone. Anna nodded while forcing another lump down her throat as she rose from her seat, everything about her expression and her body language making it obvious that speaking to this young man was not a task she wanted. "Who is Sean?" Chanterelle asked Haven more urgently as her mother forced her feet to carry her from the bedroom, closing the door once more behind her. "My former servant, Ezekiel. He was that boy's father." Haven told her quietly as he also took a seat on the edge of his bed, now fully dressed as he ran pale fingers through his long locks, seeming almost as obviously troubled by the situation as Anna, almost. "What? I thought I was the only child any of your servants ever had." Chanterelle returned with surprise. "There was another. His mother died, though. It's difficult for a woman to give birth to the child of a ghoul." He attempted to begin a more than complicated explanation, his voice dropping a bit on using the final word of the sentence, it obviously being a more offensive term than servant was. "Ezekiel tried to still attempt having a relationship with a girl from town, even whilst staying loyal to me. It was hard for him, of course, but it became even harder once she became pregnant, and she then had to finally find out what her lover really was, what I had made him into." Haven added the last bit in a whisper. "The baby lived, though." Chanterelle swallowed hard, not trying to transfer the visions of that pregnant girl's pain onto her own mother, though her limited knowledge of her own coming into the world did let her know that her mother must have endured that as well. After all, the only thing that Chanterelle did actually know about her own father was that he had been one of Haven's servants as well, 17 years earlier. "Yes, after his mother died, he stayed here with us, Ezekiel trying to take care of the child, through his own guilt about Sean's mother's death. I think the bond to me was the only thing that gave him the strength to be there for his son, despite what it had cost him." Haven paused a moment before allowing himself to add, "But even that bond wasn't strong enough to save Ezekiel from his own guilt, once his second lover became pregnant as well 2 years later." Anna took another ragged breath as the tiny window near the door told her that Sean was indeed still sitting out there, near the edge of the dirt road that passed by the large home, using that worn bag as a seat as he wrapped his arms around his thin frame, staring off into the nighttime woods across the road from Haven's home. Looking back toward the bedroom once more and remembering Haven's request that she speak to the child she had not seen in nearly 17 long years, when her own was first conceived, she took another breath and forced back her own pain at once more having to look into eyes that were so identical to Ezekiel's, and moved toward the front door. Sean immediately turned at the sound of the door opening behind him, the moonlight that caught those blue eyes, causing Anna's breath to catch once more as she forced back another wave of sad memories and moved towards the side of the road where Sean quickly stood upon her arrival. "You were looking for Ezekiel Beringer," was her greeting, which came out as more of a croak, as she was still forcing back those long-held tears over her former lover's death. "Yes, I was told this was once his home, ma'am," he told her, his own voice a bit hoarse in the cooling fall evening. "He died several years ago," she swallowed again, "so you won't find him here, I'm afraid," she answered him, every word seeming to cause her pain. Sean paused to allow himself a moment to manage the words to state the true need he had had to find the man. "But I think he was my father," he finally got out. The words caused Anna to quickly look down and away, almost as though she was losing the war against the tears fighting to escape her hazel eyes, which matched her own daughter's perfectly. "Well, I'm sorry, but he's gone." She finally breathed back to him, wanting nothing more than to run back into the house, Haven's request of her technically having been fulfilled, after all. "You did know him, though?" Sean asked, only slightly perplexed by this woman, who didn't appear to be more than 5 or so years older than himself, who seemed unmistakably saddened by talking about the passing of the father he barely had a single clear memory of, as he was taken to the orphanage where he was raised in the next town over, when he had been just barely 2 years old. "I told you he was gone. What more do you want?" Anna replied desperately, as a few of those tears did escape from her pretty eyes. "Well, he was my father, and I never really knew him. So I guess, since you seem to have known him, I was just hoping you could tell me if I had any other family," Sean asked her, his own sadness increased by her painfully obvious sorrow. "It was a long time ago," was her only response, still not looking back at his father's eyes. 17 years isn't really that long, he argued, though weakly. "I don't know what I can tell you, really," Anna said hopelessly. "You should go, though. It's already dark out," she told him as she finally gave in to her strong urge to flee from all those memories and headed back toward the front door. Support the creativity of authors by visiting Royal Road for this novel and more. "Ma'am, I don't really have anywhere else to go," he told her desperately, his words stopping her as her hand reached the door, though she still didn't look back his way again, despite her feet stopping their departure. "He was the only family I knew of, and I wasn't allowed to come look for him until I was of age. I'm 19 now. I'm too old to stay at the orphanage anymore. This was the only place I could think to go. Can't you tell me anything about the rest of his family, my family, at all?" He asked her in a pleading tone. Anna's tender heart was easily affected by his tone, as well as his striking resemblance to his father, though, and she took another deep breath as she allowed herself to look up at the stars above, knowing it was no longer a case of him possibly posing any kind of physical danger to the home's occupants now that Haven was awake once more. Though, him knowing the whole truth about his heritage, that could be very, very dangerous for all of them. "You can come inside and get some food, but I can't tell you you'll be able to stay long. I have to check with Mr. Torrance, and he's not fond of most company all that often. That's the best I can do for you, I'm afraid." "Thank you," was Sean's only response as he reached for the bag which contained all his worldly possessions and followed the clearly shaken woman into Haven's home. "Stay here, don't wander about," she told him firmly, trying not to noticeably wipe away a remaining tear. "I have to see what Mr. Torrance wants done with you," she told him in the same brief tone as she hurried back towards the closed bedroom door again. "Was he still there?" Chanterelle asked, obviously shaken as well by her own conversation she had just had with the master of the house. "Yes, and I told him about Ezekiel." Anna swallowed hard again, mostly directing her words to Haven. "He says he has nowhere else to go." Another breath, "and wants to know if he has any other family," she added quietly, her eyes inadvertently turning back towards her own daughter. "So you let him in," Haven said, not allowing Chanterelle a response, though still speaking gently. "I told him we could give him a meal, but that he shouldn't expect to stay long," she assured, then added, more softly, "I don't know what to tell him about his family, though." she finished, looking down once more. He should know that he has a sister, Haven said, his eyes also moving to Chanterelle as he spoke just as softly as Anna. But I'm afraid that his father has taught us, the hard way, that there's no way he should be involved in this life. And knowing your Chan's mother when you barely look much older than he and me, he added, that would definitely get him involved. He stated the obvious. So what do we do? Anna asked as she took an exhausted seat on the sofa near the bed once more. He really doesn't have anywhere else to go. I suppose we can offer him a job, an actual job, not like your own positions. Haven added with only a brief smile, and then continued. I suppose he can stay in the shed at the corner of the property and take care of the grounds. I can pay him more than fairly, so he can eventually have his own home and not have to live here at the house, considering my unique sleeping habits. Haven added, trying to put the plan together at the same moment as explaining it. But to have him here, during the day, you'd have to make him exactly into what we are, and what his father was, in order to guarantee your own protection, wouldn't you? Anna asked him worriedly. He won't have a key, and will set rules that he is never to come into the home uninvited during the day anyway, Haven replied. But you'd be taking a huge risk, Haven, having anyone at all here while you slept, without having their loyalty, I mean. Anna continued, though her worry over the plan more than obvious. I don't use my blood just to gain loyalty. It's also to give the two of you the strength to protect me. I can quite easily gain any mortal's loyalty without ever having to spill a drop of my own blood. And my blood has cost that boy, and both of you, enough already. He finished solemnly as he headed from the room to tend to their guest himself. Evening, Mr. Beringer. Haven's voice slowly interrupted Sean's inspection of one of Anna's paintings, which hung on the wall near the front of the home. He quickly turned at the sound of Haven's voice, almost immediately being floored by a feeling of awe and majesty inspired by the man who looked no older than himself, as well as yet another deeper feeling, almost that of déjà vu, which was inspired not only by the surroundings of the home, but by Haven himself. Mr. Torrance? Sean asked, not sounding convinced of the correctness of his statement, considering the very youthful appearance the man did have, not to mention how thrown he also was by Haven's eyes, which seemed to contain so much knowledge, though somehow were not able to hide his immediate appreciation for Sean's appearance, almost as though stunned by the other young man's beauty. Haven seemed to need a moment to almost break himself out of some sort of entrancement that Sean's very appearance brought on, before he willed himself back to the present moment and the situation at hand. Honor and her. His sentence came to a halt as the two women exited the bedroom, almost as if on cue. Chanterelle, they'll get you a warm meal for the night. There is also a cot in the shed near the tree line behind the house. It's not the most comforting of accommodations, but it will do if you truly have nowhere else to go. Haven offered, having broken himself out of that beauty-inspired entrancement, despite how he still couldn't completely hide the way his eyes continued to move over Sean appreciatively. Your, parents would be okay with that then? Sean asked for assurance, as he still had trouble believing that a boy who looked to be the exact same age as himself could possibly be the master of such a beautiful house, not to mention being the master of two beautiful servants. Haven looked down only briefly, not wishing to lie to the boy, but knowing it was the proper thing to do, for the safety of all four of them. Like yourself, I too am an orphan. I just had the good fortune to have been born into a family of wealth, rather than a family of servants. Fate can be cruel or kind in turns, I'm afraid, he told Sean, though gently. Sean simply swallowed at the ever so wisely, as well as cryptically spoken words, but did nothing more than nod in response as the two strikingly silent young women moved off toward the kitchen of the home, leaving Sean and Haven behind in the main living area of the home, together. Finding his voice and his manners once more, Sean finally spoke again. I have no way to repay you for your hospitality, I'm afraid, Sean admitted sadly. You can work the grounds, just make sure not to disturb us while you work. He added the last bit firmly, and then softened his tone. After all, I do have the two women to take care of the inside of the house, and the men's work is outside anyway. You needn't be in here. And you being a stranger to us, it would be a little careless for me to let you come and go from the house as you please, at least until we know you better. That only makes sense, of course. Haven told him, forcing a carefree tone into his voice as he spoke. I assure you, I won't break your trust. I'm very grateful for the offer, I promise. Sean told him sincerely. And there's one more thing. Haven finally added after another slight pause, as he gestured for Sean to step closer to him, which he easily did. Haven then spoke in an even, almost hypnotic tone as he looked into eyes as blue as his own. You will never cause harm to myself or any member of my household, and you will do everything in your power to protect us and our secrets with unfailing obedience from this day forward. With those eerily spoken words, Haven gracefully moved away, back towards his own bedroom, the trance-like state that his very will had placed Sean into, not ending until the door closed behind him. Sean came out of the trance with a start, not sure what had caused him to seemingly go away for a moment, but somehow he gave no further thought to the matter. Over the next few weeks, both Chanterelle and her mother tried to avoid having to step foot out of the home, at least until they knew that Sean was tucked into his own meager bed for the night, anyway. Haven usually avoided leaving the home himself, as his youthful appearance was something that he definitely didn't want to be too clearly remembered by any unbound human. Just like it was rare that he ever shared his first name, either. It was true that he could easily make humans forget his name, or even having ever met him, and had to do so on more than one occasion over the last century and a half. He still found it easier and more palatable to just avoid them when he could. That, of course, was made easier by the fact that the only time he actually could leave his home, had he wished to, was when most of the world was tucked safely into their own beds. Hence, his well-earned reputation as an enigmatic recluse. After October had nearly passed was when Chanterelle's impatience and feelings of claustrophobia began getting to her. Mainly, she just missed the one friend she had made outside of the only home she had ever known. Though it was true that, on the surface, she had seemed 1,000 times freer than Claire did, the actuality was that her own short life was much, much more cloistered and private and closely guarded than Claire's had ever been. Like Claire herself had stated, Claire was just a black sheep. Chanterelle was something much, much different. She took a deep breath before heading out of the house. Her mother looked worriedly after her. Chanterelle simply nodded her assurance. The three of them had had many conversations since Sean's arrival about what they could possibly, safely, tell Sean if he were to ask about his remaining family again, which all of them were sure he would, if given the chance. Pulling her long coat around her, despite her immunity to such things as the common cold, Chanterelle determinedly made her way down the path from the front door. Sean was shoveling away a bit of early snowfall, despite how rarely he even saw any of the home's occupants making use of that path. His presence made her breath catch, but she simply nodded to him as she made her way off of the path and towards Haven's own extensive stable. If you're planning on going to town, it's quite a way. You probably wouldn't make it back before dark, Sean called after her once her destination was clear. Your point, she asked. She only half turned toward him. Her worry over the knowledge of their shared heritage sharpened her tone. Sean allowed a slightly nervous smile at her response before being compelled to continue. If Mr. Torrance won't be accompanying you, I felt I should offer my services as a chaperone. You shouldn't be traveling alone after night falls, he told her, speaking gently. I can take care of myself, she told him, though the drop in the volume of her words did tend to weaken their conviction. His smile appeared somehow sincere and amused at once by her response. He quickly added, No offense, Miss Chanterelle, but if something happened to you out there, alone, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself. And I have a feeling my new employer wouldn't be very forgiving either, he added, though he attempted to soften the words with yet another smile that could easily shake an unwary young girl. Unwary though she was not, Chanterelle still paused and took a breath, meditating on his request. I assume you can ride, she told him with a slightly defeated sigh. We had some mules at the orphanage, was his shrugged response. Mules and horses are two different things, she returned, trying not to let on her amusement at his own response. They were big mules, he returned with another innocent shrug. Chanterelle shook her head and quickly turned away to hide the small smile as she continued on her way to the stable, assuming he would follow, which he did. The two made their slow way down the dirt road in silence, other than the sound of the horses' hooves against an occasional loose stone. Though it was late in the afternoon, Chanterelle was somehow not in a hurry to reach their destination. If she had truly intended to go to town, which she hadn't, really, she was not in the mood to have to explain the reactions of the townspeople to Sean. Not to mention all the other things he would eventually end up trying to wheedle her into explaining, as well. Where she had actually pondered going was to see if, by some chance, Claire's parents were away from home again. After all, it had been a month since she had seen her friend, and the last time they had seen each other, Claire had gotten a bit of a shock in regards to the truth to yet another rumor about her new friend. Having Sean meet Claire, or her parents, was also something that Chanterelle wasn't looking forward to, at least not before having a chance to either gauge Claire's feelings about herself now, or before having a chance to get to know Sean very well, either. Chanterelle was obviously torn between several decisions along the journey, all of which had their own stressful outcomes. When the Wallace home came into view, still a distance off from them is when Chanterelle swallowed hard. Chanterelle noted that her parents' carriage was indeed still there. She then realized that her decision was now narrowed down. She couldn't very likely pay Claire a visit while her parents were home. But what really bothered her about the quick decision forced upon her was when she saw that Claire was outside once again, and her eyes had caught their approach in the distance. Claire immediately cast a worried glance towards the house her parents were still inside of, and back toward Chanterelle. She dropped the bucket of feed for the pigs and chickens, and took a few slow and wary steps toward the road. She knew her parents wouldn't approve of her visiting with this girl, especially in broad daylight, right in front of their home, but she needed to speak with her again, especially after not having seen her in the entire month since that strange day in the woods. "Town's that way," Chanterelle spoke to Sean, nodding in the direction past the Wallace home. "Go on ahead, I just have to briefly speak with my friend," she told him firmly, the order throwing him. "Are you sure?" he asked warily. "You might be reading a pirated copy. Look for the official release to support the author. It's still daylight out. You don't need to worry about me yet. Just go. I'll catch up in a few minutes." She wasn't sure which she feared more, Claire sharing her knowledge of who Chanterelle's mother was and their strange beliefs, or Sean sharing his knowledge of who their master was, and how the reclusive Mr. Torrance was a long, long way from being some dirty old man with a thing for young servant girls. Chanterelle hated this, to put it simply. She was now torn between a series of half-truths which would cause her to be at least somewhat dishonest, either with her only friend, who she was already worried about being on shaky ground with, or else with her only sibling, who didn't even know he was her sibling yet, and either of them finding out those other disturbing truths could cause great danger to her only love. Now, she did truly understand why Haven and Anna told her to be wary of any relationships outside of her lifelong home, and how it had very easily cost her father so much when he had tried to have any of those relationships as well. Sean shook his head at her tone, but said nothing as he prodded the horse into moving forward down the road. Chanterelle stopped her own mount, still near the edge of the Wallace property, which was closer to her own home. Claire slowly made her way down to the lane to greet her, constantly casting watchful glances back toward her house. She was just waiting for her parents to look outside, see who she intended to speak with, and drag her back inside by the hair. Claire bit her lip nervously as she watched Sean move past on his own horse, still 100 or so feet from where she had made her way through the large yard. Her curiosity about who he was shared in his own brief glance back toward her, as well as her heartbeat speeding a bit on the moment when their eyes met ever so briefly. Though she quickly forced herself to remember the situation at hand, and moved more quickly down to the roadside to meet Chanterelle before her parents had a chance to note the girl's presence. "Who was he?" she asked Chanterelle as she neared the roadside, casting yet another look back toward her home once more. "Is that really your only question, hun?" Chanterelle returned the greeting, forcing a wry smile as she cast her own furtive glance toward Sean's retreating form. "And why haven't I seen you for a month, obviously?" Chanterelle took a deep breath before giving into yet another half-truth, which was designed to answer both of the girl's questions. "He's a new servant. Guess who's gotten stuck training him?" she added. Considering certain duties that Mr. Torrance does ask of you, I'm assuming you're not training him in all of them." Claire returned with a bit of her own less than ladylike humor sneaking out. Though it could have been taken offensively, it somehow caused a wave of relief to pass over Chanterelle. "See, I am a bad influence on you. Good girls would never talk about such things." Chanterelle returned with a more sincere grin. "Told you I wasn't a good girl," Claire returned with her own smile. Chanterelle just shook her head with another brief chuckle. "As true as that may be, I better leave before they figure it out, too. Talk to you soon, hun," she told her with another smile as she kicked her horse into a quick gallop. She at least headed away with the satisfaction that she had managed to get through one of those stressful situations without much damage being done. This time, anyway. "People in town aren't very friendly, are they?" Sean finally broke their long, silent ride home from town, later that evening. It was thankfully mild enough that the light coating of snow on the ground earlier that day had melted, and it wasn't a completely uncomfortable ride home, temperature-wise anyway. "Guess now you know why we hardly ever leave the house," Chanterelle told him smartly. Her mood had slightly improved since discovering that her friendship with Claire did seem somewhat intact. "So dare I ask why they seem particularly unfriendly to you?" he asked warily. "You know the three of us just as well as any of them have ever bothered to get to know any of us. What do you think it is?" she asked with a bit of mischief. She wasn't able to help her curiosity about what he must be thinking about his new home's occupants. After all, that would help her to determine what his opinion would be likely to be if he were ever privy to the actual truth of their shared roots. "You and Anna both grew up in the Torrance home, right?" he asked cautiously. "We've both been there a long time," she answered as truthfully as she could, without mentioning that her mother had only lived there as long as herself. Anna had moved in once discovering that she would be having a child that only Haven was likely to be able to deal with and accept, especially through the pain that the difficult pregnancy was sure to cause Anna. Each person involved had been sure that Anna would die giving birth to Chanterelle, the same way Sean's mother had died giving birth to him. This was also the reason Ezekiel had, upon discovering Anna's pregnancy, taken his own life. Of course, that fact led to Haven and Anna being the ones left behind to take care of Sean. And neither of them had been equipped to care for a toddler 24 hours a day at that particular moment in time. "And you both obviously stayed after his parents died." Sean continued to try and relay his own thoughts on the household. At the same time, he was trying to clarify, non-offensively, what might be the underlying cause of the opinions of the townspeople. "Yes," she said briefly. "So, a teenage boy, living alone with a teenage girl, and another, only slightly older woman, with no supervision and plenty of wealth, in a house that he's obviously the master of now." Sean spoke quietly, trying not to offend while trying to give her the answer she seemed to be requesting. Chanterelle smirked. My, Sean, what are you getting at?" She had to laugh, though she did remain uneasy with the idea of him delving into any part of their past. "I swear I'm not trying to offend or imply anything, but when I was inside, I did only see one bedroom," he added, though quietly. Sean wanted to cast his eyes downwards, but he needed to watch her reaction to see how much he had truly offended her with the allusion. "Yes, he is a male, and he does have reign over two attractive, unmarried females. I suppose that could lend itself to him taking advantage of that fact. I suppose," she partially admitted to a truth in his words, though still wore a smile. Sean swallowed a bit as he then did look away before managing to continue. "So, he does then ask favors of you and Anna?" he asked. He knew it was not his place to ask such a thing, but somehow he wasn't able to stop himself from asking nonetheless. "You've seen him. It's hardly a duty either she or I balk at," Chanterelle admitted with a small smile. She still seemed wonderfully unoffended, which couldn't help but pull Sean's eyes back to her. He finally took a long breath as they continued down the road, trying to find some response to such an odd situation before him. Though he couldn't help being drawn into learning more, it being such an unheard-of lifestyle for any woman he had ever met, as few as there were, considering his own upbringing. But what about husbands and families? Don't you and Anna want that? He is our family, was her simple response. At the cost of the obvious opinions of everyone else, though. It's clear they don't approve of you, and you must know that that's the reason, he told her, forgetting his fear of offending her. He was too curious about their lives now that she had admitted to such a strange fact of them. I somehow must believe that having the love of someone close to you is more important than having the approval of strangers, Chanterelle told him quietly. Though she spoke sincerely, she didn't let herself glance back to see the look in his eyes, which was a completely unexpected one of not disapproval, but admiration. It was the night of Hallows Eve, as Sean found himself tossing and turning atop the less than comfortable cot, inside the chilly, candle-lit shed at the corner of Haven's property. He was still quite thankful to be given that much of a home outside his life at the orphanage, yet somehow could not stop the insomnia that was plaguing him that night. It was then that he heard movement outside the shed at an hour that was only slightly before midnight. The sound made him rise from his bed to look out the small window of the shed. He couldn't help his sheer concern for the safety of the home's occupants, though he still only really saw on rare occasions, even a month after having moved onto their property. Through the window, he saw all three of them moving through the yard and out toward the woods that lay behind the home. The sight itself was made that much stranger by the elaborately colored clothes they wore, as well as the baskets, masks, and candles they carried with them as they started off into that dark nighttime woods. Sean narrowed his eyes as he watched Haven and his mistresses head off together through the trees. It was only then that he had more suspicion heaped onto the scene upon remembering that it was indeed Hallows Eve. Sean swallowed a bit as he tried to talk himself into not following them, though he was more than curious after the sheltered life he had led behind the orphanage walls. And the mystery that surrounded the home's residents themselves made this a difficult scene to ignore. He took one more deep breath and reached for his worn coat before attempting to remain unseen as he followed their departing forms off into the woods. It was a lengthy walk, and a difficult one. Sean tried to remain far enough behind to keep them from realizing he was following them, while simultaneously trying to follow the light produced by the candles they each carried. Sean had decided somehow that it would be wiser not to bring his own candle in the interest of staying hidden. When they finally stopped at that clearing in the woods, Sean quickly ducked into a hiding place nearby as he watched them. He attempted to remain as quiet as possible, considering the religious imagery the nuns at the orphanage had forced into his head about all those evil pagans throughout his short life. Sean watched their celebration from his hiding place, riveted by it the entire time. They danced, donned masks, lit their candles, and chanted, while placing little ornately wrapped sweets around the now raging fire. Their celebrations continued well past midnight and beyond. All of their motions seemed to be truly joyful and not honestly malicious at all. Surprising himself, the only fear Sean did have was just that of their celebration honestly taking some sudden strange turn, as the members of the church had every other person convinced that it surely would have to. Then as the hour grew later, there was a turn, though Sean was not sure malicious would be the word for it. However, it was definitely something that could easily be deemed evil by all of those good, church-going folk. The three took turns drinking from a bottle of red, which Sean could only assume and hope was wine. Haven licked it from each of the women's lips as they took sips, and vice versa. Then they moved closer to one another, still near to the fire which lit their motions clearly for Sean's eyes to watch. Once they moved closer together was when Haven allowed the women to easily undress him, and then pulled them free of their beautiful clothes as well. Then all three, still wearing those half-masks, began their lovemaking. Haven would first please one woman with his hands or lips, while pleasing the other with other parts of his anatomy. Their lovemaking lasted for longer than Sean could even fathom. He was shocked to see such a display at all, but also unable to pull his eyes away for a single moment of it. As he watched, his body reacted as any 19-year-old boys would be likely to react to a much less titillating scene, let alone that very one. This story has been unlawfully obtained without the author's consent. Report any appearances on Amazon. When the three had indulged each other's pleasures to the point of exhaustion, they gently, even lovingly, kissed one another's lips. They then slowly, exhaustedly though happily, gathered their clothes and other various items, except the sweets, which they left surrounding the fire. They then headed back the way they had come. Despite his current state, Sean had to duck into yet another hiding place in the hopes of not being seen, especially after what he had just witnessed. Though if any of the three lovers had actually seen him in their departure from the clearing, they didn't let on to the fact. Sean stayed hidden there for more than a few long moments, considering his own shock, as well as his overwhelming arousal at having taken in that scene at all. Sean was strikingly silent the next morning as he cleaned out the stables. He would not even let himself look towards the house once, for fear of having to see one of its occupants exit the home, and then having to find a way to keep them from seeing, all over his face, the very fact that he was unable to stop replaying the scene from the night before, through his brain, again and again. Then his fears did manifest, as Chanterelle exited the home with a yawn but a smile as she looked around the grounds. Her eyes finally found Sean through the entrance to the still open stable. "Morning, Sean," she greeted him with a smile, her eyes narrowing slightly at the way he immediately looked away from her. "Morning," he forced the greeting back through the breaking of his voice, as he looked as though he was literally pained to keep from looking back up at her. "Something wrong?" she asked, the worst possible question she could have asked him point blank. The situation was made only worse by the fact of her moving closer to the stable, where he tried to force his hands to keep working, without much success. "Like what?" was the only response he could force. "You're asking me," she returned, moving now to the doorway of the stable. "You're the one who looks shocked to death by something or other," she told him, with her same habit of prying truths out of others that they didn't easily share on their own. "Just didn't sleep well," he mumbled, not able to say much else somehow. Chanterelle scoffed with a wrinkle of her nose, obviously not believing his explanation for a moment. She then decided to deal with this as she did other things. People couldn't hurt you if you beat them to the punch, and forced them to confront what they were refusing to say, before they were ready to say it, therefore shocking them off their guard. Well, there was that, and the fact that she knew that Sean wouldn't be able to hurt her, no matter what secrets he discovered about her family. Haven had made sure of that, the way only he could. Well, it was Samhain. "It was what?" he asked, shocked enough to quickly look back up at her, just as she knew he would be. "Samhain," she repeated matter-of-factly, moving to pick a wild berry from where a few grew near the door of the stable. "The night when the veil between the living and the dead is at the weakest," she said in a tone that implied that this strange statement was one he should somehow already have knowledge of. "What?" he asked more loudly, more shaken, as if that were possible. "The night when it's the easiest for spirits to manifest. Probably a few mischievous ones playing that kept you awake. It's like their Christmas." She smiled fondly as she popped the berry into her pretty lips, lips that he had just recently witnessed performing activities that normally a man would have to pay a woman from the local brothel to perform for him. "Samhain," he repeated, trying once again to shake those visions of the previous night from his head, unsuccessfully. "They probably would have left you alone if you'd worn your mask, or left them a sweet. It would have only been polite, you know," she teased. "What?" he repeated with a shake of his head, easily forgetting his tasks as he continued to watch her in disbelief. "You already said that." She smiled again as she turned on her heel to sniff a nearby flower as well. "You're mad, aren't you?" He couldn't stop himself from allowing the words to leave his own lips. "But I bet I'm the most interesting girl you know." She chuckled before turning away again and heading back towards those same woods once more. 1584. Months turned to a year as Chanterelle continued secretly seeing Claire, and ever so slowly tutoring her in her own belief system. All the while she still somehow managed to keep the other girl from having the opportunity to even lay her pretty green eyes upon any other member of her household, including Sean. It wasn't that difficult a thing, as Sean had his duties during the day, as did Anna. Haven was obviously out of commission during those daytime hours, and Claire herself knew she'd be immediately rushed to the nearest convent if her parents ever even had a clue that she had tried to go and visit the Torrance home. Chanterelle visiting Claire was less of a risk overall. If she must, Claire could always claim that the girl was simply passing by on her way to town. No such excuse would have ever worked to explain her own presence at Chanterel's home, though. But that suited the Torrance household just fine. Having one unwary mortal on the grounds as the sun was high in the sky was quite enough for them. As for Sean adjusting to life there over the next year, he mostly just regarded the three of them from a distance. He didn't say much at all when Chanterelle wandered out onto the grounds, which she rarely did anyway. He had somehow convinced himself to just give in to his theory of all three of them being just a bit on the mad side. But he accepted it, as their madness never truly seemed to cause harm to anyone or anything, except possibly his own psyche. And that was only a result of him just trying to decipher it all, during his less busy moments, anyway. Sean then found his curiosity gnawing at him again, as he realized that Hallows Eve, or Samhain, as the strange redhead called it, had come around once more. Upon that thought, the sight that he had beheld the year before once again began running through his brain on a minute-by-minute basis, and it was still just as disturbing as it had been when he had seen it with his own eyes. He could barely concentrate on his duties that day, as all he found himself doing was wondering if the firelit orgy was to take place again that night. He shook his head as his body reacted to the thought. He wished it hadn't, but he obviously had no control over that very basic function of his body, considering his own reasonably inexperienced life. Sure, there had been a few girls at the orphanage who were near to his age, and he had exchanged a kiss with a few of them here or there, or possibly an improper touching of one of their thighs when the nuns were distracted. But every girl seemed to completely lose his interest before he even got so far as behind one of their bodices. They seemed just completely and totally, abysmally, dull, and all the same as the next. This fact caused Sean to find himself endlessly bored by each and every one of them, despite what surface beauty any of them displayed. He sighed and took a breath, shaking his head at the memories of his uneventful youth. The other boys there had told tales of getting a bit farther with the girls than he ever had. Still, even that did not convince him that he could see himself finding interest in any one of them for more than 5 minutes. And then there was the thought of going to see one of the women who were paid to give their attentions to young, inexperienced men. Somehow that didn't even appeal to him. Sean found he had set himself the standard of wanting a girl to not only be interesting to him, but to also have an honest interest in him as well. He didn't want a girl who just had a curiosity to know what it was like the young girls at the orphanage. Nor was he interested in a woman with nothing more than a thirst for cash, like the women at the brothel. Another shake of his head, as he realized that there had never been one girl he had met in 2 long decades who did hold his interest for very long. He wondered if there ever would be in a town full of carbon-copied young women. Then he looked back at the house and swallowed as Chanterelle moved past the window, forcing him to correct his previous thought. It was true that he had convinced himself that she was just a little touched, but that fact itself did mean that she had never bored him in their brief encounters. He was almost visibly arguing with himself as he watched her move out of sight once more. The girl was not quite right, but she wasn't unattractive, and he knew that that fact extended to every detail of her physicality after what he had witnessed the previous year. But he also knew that there was obviously some kind of relationship between herself and Haven, and a very intimate one at that. Though, he also knew that Anna shared that same kind of relationship with the same man, which therefore lent doubt to the validity of such a relationship for either woman. Sean sighed again, trying to ignore the fact that no other girl who he had ever spoken to had ever occupied his thoughts as much as the little redhead now did. He couldn't help letting himself wonder if there was truly a reason for that, and one that should at least be explored, though very, very carefully. As though fate wanted to force him into a decision, Chanterelle then stepped out of the house once more. And he felt that he had to make a decision then and there, about how and indeed if he should hint at the thoughts about her which were now plaguing him. "That works better if you actually move the shovel while you're doing it," she told him wryly, as she gestured to the way he had been standing frozen in a still dirty stall. "Very funny," he replied under his breath as he half turned away, trying to buy himself a bit more time for that decision. "You're just not a morning person, are you?" she asked as she carelessly leaned against the stable door. This tale has been unlawfully lifted from Royal Road. Report any instances of this story if found elsewhere. Gonna say the spirits kept me awake again, he dared. He then took a brief glance back toward her. Thought that wasn't supposed to be till tonight. Wow, we got at least 2 fast learners in this town. The words were cryptic, though her lips wore a smile. What? He asked as he looked at her once more, then added, Never mind. I doubt I want to know. Of course you do, she teased playfully. If you say so, he mumbled back to her. Call it intuition, she replied before turning on her heel and heading back in the direction of the path through the woods once more. What on earth do you do out there in the woods by yourself so often? He couldn't stop himself from calling after her. Told you wanted to know, she chided, beaming back at him. Forget I said anything, he mumbled with a shake of his head as he looked back in the direction of the waiting stall. Come on, she laughed as she moved back to grasp his wrist and began pulling him from the barn with her. I do have a job, he argued weakly. He couldn't manage much volume while trying not to pay an undue amount of attention to the feel of her tiny hand encircling his wrist as he let her lead him away. It's a holiday. You can take a few hours off, she assured as she continued to lead him with her towards the woods, just the way she had done with Claire, slightly over a year earlier and several times since. A holiday, he mumbled, though once again found himself unable to stop his next sentence. I can just imagine how you'll be celebrating. Really, what you imagining? She grinned, causing him to wonder if she did have some knowledge of his spying on them the previous year. Sean just shook his head, refusing to give her any answer. Once they reached that clearing, Sean was obviously flooded with even more memories of the previous year's celebration. He awkwardly took a seat on a large boulder that sat in the corner of the clearing, several feet off from the place where he had watched their lovemaking the year before. He attempted to sit in a position that would hide any arousal from her eyes as she flitted about the clearing, chasing after butterflies. For once, Chanterelle seemed younger than her actual age, when the opposite was true most often. Though after the previous year, it was nigh impossible for him to see her as some innocent young girl any longer. So, why has your chattering suddenly stopped? He asked. His nervousness forced him to fill the silence between them as she continued her carefree chasing and releasing of the last remaining butterflies that populated the woods before the temperature cooled, and they disappeared for another year. I was still waiting on your answer, she stated simply. What answer? He asked, attempting to feign innocence of what she meant. About how you were imagining we'd be celebrating, she easily offered, not letting him off the hook that easily. How would I know? He stated with an uneasy shrug. Well, you did watch us last year, didn't you? She stated point blank. In that moment, Sean was sure that his heart stopped at the sound of her words. He forced every bit of wit he had to come up with an answer to that accusation. I heard noise late at night. I was worried. I followed the noise, then you were all out here, and I didn't think I should disturb whatever was going on. He stammered the explanation as a blush rose to his pale cheeks. Chanterelle just shook her head with a surprising smile. And you stuck around for another year? I'm impressed. Apparently the church isn't that good at brainwashing everyone after all. Like I said, I have nowhere else to go, he repeated, still amazed that he wasn't facing her fury at him, admitting that he had spied on such an activity, after all. Well, if it truly shook you that terribly, you would have found somewhere else to go. Anywhere else to go, she told him, speaking surprisingly softly as she turned back towards him with an oddly gentle smile. There's hope for you yet, she added with yet another coy grin curling her lips. Sean swallowed hard at her, having seemed to accept what he thought was sure to lose him his invitation to stay with them. He then realized that this young girl was truly full of more surprises than he could even imagine, and that drew him to her even more strongly. Do you really want this life, though? He asked softly. Did I appear to not be enjoying myself that night? She replied with a trace of mischief. But everything else aside, he began with a deep breath as he slowly rose from his seat. Do you really want a lover you have to share? Don't you want someone who's yours and only yours? He asked more quietly. I do love him, and I know he loves me. It's not like there's anyone else I've ever wanted, she admitted, her tone matching the softness of his. No one else, Sean repeated. I know you could find a man who wouldn't make you share him, one who would just be yours and yours alone, he dared. Please, it's not like there's many men out there who would fit that description, Sean. Even if there was a faithful one among them, they all think I'm some kind of devil woman and won't come near me, she scoffed. Sean then stepped closer to her and leaned down as he spoke, causing her to simply freeze. I'm near you, and there's no one else I've ever really had any interest in for more than one conversation, ever in my entire life. There's just you, devil woman or not. It was then that he bravely attempted to lean in for a kiss. Chanterelle immediately pushed him forcefully away, containing more strength in her tiny frame than he could have ever imagined. God, Chanterelle, I was only going to kiss you, not attack you or anything, he assured her, wounded by her reaction, as he reached for the shoulder that she nearly bruised with the force of her push. You can't do that, Sean, she told him. She seemed truly shaken by the attempt at what he saw as only a simple kiss, and a much more innocent show of affection than what he had seen her indulge in the very place where they now stood once more. I don't understand how upset I've made you. I watched you nearly have an orgy of some kind in this very spot, but you're terrified of a kiss, he asked, his own shock at her behavior sharpening his tone. That's not the problem, Sean, she told him in a near whisper as she turned away. She nervously bit her nail. She realized then that her refusal to tell him who he actually was, at least to her, had now come back to haunt her so very thoroughly. Then what is? He had to ask, almost afraid of hearing whatever answer she may give him. Sean, I was born here. I've lived in this home all my life. My father was a servant too. She then tried to force herself on, not able to look back at him, knowing it would make it that much harder to finish the sentence. My father was your father, she choked out the last bit, turning just in time to see all of the color drain from his face as he quickly turned, fleeing from the clearing in shock. Are you here to tell me I have to be gone by morning? Was Sean's sad greeting as Anna entered the shed that he had banished himself to, now slightly after nightfall. Why would I be here to tell you that? Anna asked him gently as she overturned an empty basket and took a seat upon it there in the corner of the tiny shed that had been his home for the last year. I tried to kiss one of my boss's mistresses, didn't I? He scoffed, still not able to turn his eyes towards her. He remained seated atop the cot, his back against the wall, his beautiful eyes burning a hole in the bedding in front of him. Think about that sentence a moment. One of his mistresses. Monogamy obviously isn't among one of his most apparent demands, she stated, still speaking softly. Sean just shook his head. You knew, though. You knew she was my sister, he choked a bit on the sentence. We should have told you, but your father. He killed himself when he found out about Chanterelle's conception. Your family tree isn't the most pleasant subject. For any of us, she attempted to comfort him while still not letting on to who she was to Chanterelle as well. That would be an even harder truth to get him past. Trying not to let his sadness at the whole of his new life situation show through too clearly, Sean spoke again. But the only girl that I've ever had any interest in, ever. And she's my sister. God, what does that say about me? He pleaded. You didn't know she was your sister, Sean. How could you have? Anna attempted to assure him. Besides, all you did was try to kiss her. That's not the most terrible thing most boys your age might have tried upon being left alone with a girl they knew was quite sexually free, shall we say, she added. Sean just shook his head once more. But no other girl has ever even interested me. What's wrong with me? Sean, you grew up sheltered from most of the world. You're barely 20. I'm pretty sure that it's more than likely that you'll find another one who piques your interest. I promise. But that's just it. There were girls there, and all of them were exactly the same. None of them I ever really even considered trying to be with. As long as she's got a pretty face and a nice figure, that was all it took for the other boys to want them. Not me, though. Doesn't that mean there's something wrong with me? He pleaded for her assurance. Actually, Sean, I think it would mean the opposite. That there's something right with you, she told him with an honest smile. So why am I probably the only boy my age who hasn't? He just shook his head. But if that's all you wanted, you could have gotten it from the girls the other boys were getting it from, couldn't you have? She pointed out to him. I suppose, he admitted quietly. And obviously, you want more for yourself. And that in no way means there's anything at all wrong with you, she told him once more. He paused a long moment before speaking up. Mr. Torrance isn't sending me away, then. Only if you want to leave. If not, you're more than welcome to stay. How do I deal with Chanterelle, though? He had to ask. You still want her? Anna asked. God, no, he told her loudly. Then there's nothing to deal with. We were all at fault for the misunderstanding. That's all it was. And I'm sure there will be others. They're part of life, she told him. Her maternal qualities were more than obvious, despite the youth she appeared to have. Why are you all so nice to me? None of you seem to be the type to really care about the opinions of others, or even conventionality, he couldn't help adding. Maybe it's not us, it's just karma. You've been dealt enough bad hands in life. It's time for a lucky streak, no doubt, she told him with a smile as she rose from her makeshift seat. She then leaned in to place a small kiss upon his forehead before heading out of the shed once more. After all, it was a night for celebration, not despair.